The sci-fi and superhero elements in television had been building up steadily since the late 80s, and by the 2000s, the superhero genre had finally cemented its place in daily television. While box office hits like X-Men and Spider-Man delivered mystery and awe, eventually stretching and becoming iconic franchises, shows like Smallville were demonstrating how action and drama could go hand in hand to entertain TV audiences. Thus began the decade that would define superhero shows, with networks and studios tripping over each other to gain blockbuster status and mainstream success. Naturally, the landscape became extremely competitive, and while shows like Daredevil and Firefly managed to become commercial successes, many others slipped under the radar and were eventually buried. The unfortunate thing is, many of these shows were unique in terms of storytelling, but didn't manage to reach the heights that their more popular counterparts managed. Some were snubbed due to bad timing, network issues, or behind-the-scenes problems. Ultimately, these shows vanished from the collective consciousness and lost relevance. So, in today's video, we're going to dig up some forgotten superhero shows and see if they really deserve to get canceled. Before we get into the list, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Together, these three are the protectors of New Gotham. The Birds of Prey.
Birds of Prey, 2002 to 2003. This show was set in Gotham City, which had been abandoned by Batman and was loosely inspired by the DC comics of the same name. The Birds of Prey continued to fight in the shadows. Oracle and Huntress had taken over Batman's role and were joined by Dinah Redmond, Alfred Pennyworth, and Detective Jesse Reese. The show was centered around the concept of metahumans, who were people born with strange powers that had no logical explanation. Unless they were hereditary, no two powers were the same, and a whole metahuman culture existed which mainstream society had no idea about. Detective Reese teamed up with the Birds of Prey to take down metahuman criminals, and initially, he disapproved of Helena's vigilantism. Later, however, he realized there was a pressing need for a team like that to exist and take down the criminals that the police could never catch or prosecute on their own. The Birds of Prey often confront traps set by Harley Quinn, the mastermind who did not reveal herself until the end of the series. Helena Kyle, also known as Huntress, was the daughter of Batman and Catwoman, herself a half-metahuman. She grew up with her mother and didn't know who her father was until Catwoman was murdered by the Joker. She was then taken in by Barbara Gordon and trained. Batgirl/Oracle, the alter ego of Barbara Gordon, was the apprentice of Batman and the daughter of his trusted ally, Police Commissioner James Gordon. She was shot by the Joker, making her paralyzed and halting her career as Batgirl. She then renamed herself Oracle and used her proficiency in weaponry and computer hacking to fight organized crime. She used Huntress to do the work she could not physically do, and also tried to develop a cybernetic spine implant in the hopes that she could one day walk again. Dinah Redmond was a metahuman who proved herself to the other two and joined the group. She was a touch telepath who could use telekinesis later, and under Oracle's training, she became a wonderful combatant. Jesse Hawk was a police detective with a sketchy past who initially didn't like the vigilantism of the Birds of Prey, but later understood their significance and developed a romantic relationship with Huntress. Alfred Pennyworth was the loyal butler of the Wayne family who served Helena and Barbara in Batman's absence. Finally, Dr. Harleen Quinzel was the main antagonist of the show, a psychiatrist who saw Helena while the latter had no idea about her real identity. She had come to seek revenge on New Gotham for what it had done to her Mr. J. While she projects herself as a respectable professional and is called upon by the authorities to deal with felons and other criminals, she herself is insane and uses her connections to achieve her goals. Throughout the series, the Birds of Prey are shown working on catching criminals and metahumans who pose a threat to society. The pasts of Dinah and Jesse catch up with the team, and surprising revelations are made, which test the patience of the team as a whole. At the end, it was hinted that Bruce Wayne was still very much alive and in hiding, as Alfred talked to him over the phone and tells him about Helena and how he would be proud of who she's become. The series garnered 7.6 million views, which was significant at that time, but it was canceled when the ratings dropped sharply. It lasted only 13 episodes in total and could have been a very promising show if they had managed to keep up with the storytelling of the pilot episode. Black Scorpion, 2001. This show was based on two Roger Corman Showtime TV movies, Black Scorpion from 1995 and its 1997 sequel, Black Scorpion 2: Aftershock. It revolves around a female police officer who fought the streets at night under the alias Black Scorpion. Her real name is Darcy Walker, played by Michelle Lintel. Based in Angel City, a fictionalized version of Los Angeles, she works as a police detective by day. Her father was killed by the corrupt district attorney, who was then arrested but had the charges mysteriously dropped. This forced Darcy to take to the streets as a vigilante because she realized not all criminals could be punished according to the rule of law. She's depicted as a red-headed enforcer who managed to bring justice to criminals more efficiently while she wasn't using her shield and badge. She was a big fan of the color black, which probably influenced her costume choice to some extent. However, she chose to name herself after a scorpion based on an old story her father had told her when she was young about a scorpion trying to cross a river. While she had amazing hand-to-hand combat skills, Black Scorpion wasn't someone who had enhanced powers or abilities, much like Batman. She used different kinds of technology and had a car known as Stingray with voice command weaponry and disguise capability, which made it look like a regular Corvette. She wore a ring that shot very powerful blasts of energy, and it also had a transformative capability that allowed her to change into her costume. Detective Steve Rafferty was Darcy's partner and love interest, and he was also the best policeman on the force. Darcy wanted to reveal her identity to him, but every time she brought it up, the opportunity slipped away. Steve also expressed a crush on the Black Scorpion, which irked Darcy despite it literally being her alter ego. Specs and Slugger were two incompetent policemen who worked with Darcy and Steve, and they almost always crashed their car while chasing the Black Scorpion. Argyle Sims was Darcy's personal mechanic and the only person who knew who she really was. He arranged for her high-tech equipment and acted as comic relief as well as a mentor. Arthur Worth was the extremely corrupt and criminally incompetent mayor of Angel City, and he was always involved in shady deals to fund his re-election campaign or to furnish his lavish lifestyle. His scheming caused many criminals to spring up in the city. Dr. Phineas Phoenix was a scientist who dealt in reanimating the dead and creating human clones. He aimed to take a criminal and somehow reform him into a productive member of society. Captain Henry Strickland was the incompetent and morbidly obese boss of Darcy and Steve. Rather than doing any serious police work, he spent most of his time binging food and cleaning up after Specs and Slugger whenever they messed up their jobs. A number of villains appeared throughout the series, but the most prominent of them was Breathtaker, played by Adam West, the OG TV Batman himself. He was the one responsible for the death of Darcy's father, thus the reason for the birth of the Black Scorpion. Another villain was Aftershock, who used to be a benevolent seismologist but turned to crime when the mayor foiled her plan of creating a machine to detect earthquakes. She was later resurrected by Dr. Phoenix. Black Scorpion wasn't exactly a memorable show. A lot of people found that the titular character was over-sexualized and the storyline was shaky at best. A lot of people reported that the show was so bad that it became ultimately entertaining. It's not too much of a wonder that it was ultimately canceled, but it's still fun to talk about.
Please help me.
Witchblade, 2001 to 2002. Witchblade was one of the highest-rated TV shows on the network at that time, and a lot of fans were quite upset when it was canceled after just a year. Based on the comic book by the same name, it starred Yancey Butler as Sarah Pizzini, an NYPD homicide detective. When her best friend is killed, she becomes frustrated that the killer is not brought to justice. She's convinced that the killer is none other than Tommy Gallo, a legendary hitman who can't be touched. When one of his henchmen hurts her partner, she pursues him into a museum where the artifacts of Joan of Arc are displayed. While searching for the assailant, Sarah becomes momentarily entranced by a metal gauntlet in a display case and is surprised when a mysterious figure appears and vanishes instantly. She then gets caught in a fierce gunfight which destroys the gauntlet's display case, and it launches itself at her, settling on her arm and seemingly saving her life. It later becomes evident that all of this was planned by a billionaire named Kenneth Irons, who was obsessed with the artifact known as the Witchblade. It chooses who will wear it and has chosen very few warriors over the years, with all of them being women. Sarah doesn't understand why the Witchblade chose her, so she embarks on a difficult journey of self-discovery. The first season of Witchblade had mixed reviews, with most of them leaning towards the positive end. The Chicago Tribune praised the show for being true to the source material and for the seamless transition to the big screen. It was full of atmospheric characters and memorable action sequences, making for a fun watch. The second season received fewer positive reviews than its predecessor, but it still brought a lot of critical acclaim. Many people were especially impressed at how the show handled a female lead in an environment where superheroes were almost always male, and the few female superheroes there were almost always over-sexualized to the point where their powers took a back seat. Yancey Butler's portrayal of Sarah Pazzini was quite memorable and captivating. The show was cancelled after 2 seasons, and while there had never been any official reason, most fans presume it was due to Butler entering rehab for her alcoholism. Obviously, the show couldn't continue without the main lead, and her portrayal was too good for the showrunners to consider a replacement. In fact, Witchblade was and remains the highest-rated TV show to be cancelled abruptly. Since then, many projects have come together about the comic book, but none of them managed to be as popular as the show. Ultimately, they all faded into obscurity. However, fans remain hopeful of a possible new show or movie. Nightman, 1997 to 1999. Developed by Glenn A. Larson, Nightman was a superhero TV show adapted from the 1993 comic book The Nightman, published by Malibu Comics, who were later purchased by Marvel. It was created by Steve Englehart, who also wrote 3 episodes of the series. Matt McCollum starred as the titular character, a superhero whose real name was Johnny Domino. He's a well-known San Franciscan jazz musician and saxophonist who accidentally got struck by lightning in a cable car accident. This gave him not only the special ability to telepathically recognize robots, but also takes away his ability to sleep. He gains radio-like properties which allows him to pick up on mental frequencies. Therefore, he can now listen to the frequency of evil and can hear the thoughts of evildoers as well as learn about the evil deeds they're about to commit everywhere he goes. He owns a special blue-caped, bulletproof black bodysuit which grants him abilities such as flight, advanced sight functions, including the ability to see clearly in the dark and fire laser beams, and holographic camouflage-like invisibility. While he fights new enemies in every few episodes, the main antagonist of the series is computer technology's billionaire, Kieran Keyes. He killed Johnny's father, Frank Domino, in the premiere of the 2nd and final season of the show. The production companies involved with Nightman were Crescent Entertainment, Village Roadshow Pictures, Pro7, Atlantis Films, WIC Entertainment, Alliance Atlantis, Glenn Larson Entertainment Network, and Tribune Entertainment. While it's not known why the show ended, we can assume it was because of low ratings and viewership. The premise of the show was promising, especially due to the telepathic abilities of the protagonist, but the execution failed to leave a lasting impact on audiences. The 2nd season was shot in Canada, which required many of the characters in the show to be axed off, creating problems with the continuity and pace of the series. Fans of the show have pointed out that the writing was nothing out of this world. It was a normal show and quite funny in certain ways. The action scenes were also well executed. Maybe if the atmosphere of the time had not been so competitive and oversaturated with other superhero shows, Nightman could have made it a few more seasons and ended on a more satisfactory note. In a landscape where studios were fighting tooth and nail to come out with the best and most profitable show, anything that wasn't exceptional could obviously not make it through. And that's exactly what happened to Nightman. Flash Gordon, 2007 to 2008. At the time, Flash Gordon had a cult following and was massively popular, but not for the reasons you might think. The show was developed by Peter Hume, who also served as executive producer and showrunner in addition to writing the first and last episodes. It was loosely based on the comic strip of the same name and followed the adventures of Stephen Flash Gordon, played by Eric Johnson, a 25-year-old man who lives with his mother. His father was a scientist and had mysteriously gotten lost after an accident when Stephen was only 13 years old. His ex-girlfriend was TV reporter Dale Arden, who was engaged to police detective Joe Wiley. His father's eccentric former assistant, Dr. Hans Zarkov, appears when rifts tear across space, which allowed for intergalactic travel, specifically from Earth to the distant planet of Mongo. Mongo is ruled by a ruthless and cruel dictator named Ming, played by John Ralston, and he controls the source water on the planet, which is the only form of safe drinking water. He's condemned in closed circles and hailed as a benevolent father in public. Instead of being a traditionally evil, power-hungry dictator, Ming appears to be more like a level-headed, media-savvy dictator. Intriguingly, in previous adaptations, Ming was portrayed as an Asian man, but in Flash Gordon, he was shown to be Caucasian. His daughter is Princess Aura, and she's disturbed by her father's actions and ways. A bounty hunter from Mongo named Balin gets trapped on Earth and joins forces with Flash, Dale, and Zarkov, eventually becoming their guide to Mongo. There's also the Tritons, who live beneath the ocean, the Phrygians, who live in the frozen wastelands, and the Zern, who are just blue men. There's another group called the Deviates, who are mutants whose ancestors had drank the polluted and toxic gray water to survive. They're distrusted by everyone else on Mongo. Unfortunately, this revival of a classic wasn't very well received. Metacritic gives it a score of 35 out of 100 based on 13 reviews. Numerous critics called it disgraceful and among the worst series ever produced. However, some praised it in a complicated way, saying that the initial episodes of Flash Gordon were simply intolerable, but if one managed to somehow sit through them, the later episodes actually turned out better and the story started making sense. The showrunners probably didn't think too much before making the first few episodes, turning them mind-numbingly boring and then bringing in a level of complexity that could have engaged the viewers. The only problem with this was, by the time the show actually got good, no one was even watching it except for critics. When the show premiered in the UK, numerous papers said that they had earlier been quite vitriolic about the show, but urged audiences to stick with it because their patience would ultimately be rewarded. In any event, due to the bizarre first few episodes, Flash Gordon became famous for all the wrong reasons. While it did redeem itself in the end, viewers weren't really happy about having to sit through what they called nonsense to reach a satisfying climax. Ultimately, it's not too difficult to understand why Flash Gordon got cancelled. However, the comic strip it was inspired from became wildly popular after the show. Blade, the series, 2006. This show shared continuity with the Blade trilogy and was produced by New Line Television in association with Marvel Entertainment. The show takes place after the events of Blade Trinity in 2004. The Blade trilogy was one source of the MCU's meteoric rise to fame in later years, and a lot of people believe that they brought in the funding required to get Iron Man off the ground. Due to the success of the films, a TV show regarding the character was poised, and it made sense for everyone to capitalize on the moment. The pilot episode of Blade, the series, was written by Peter O'Fallon from a script by Goyer, who had also written the scripts for all three of the original films, and Jeff Jones. The show starred Sticky Fingers, credited as Kirk Sticky Jones, as Eric Brooks/Blade, and aired for only one season. It received mixed reviews from critics, yet the action scenes and cinematography were praised. However, the absence of Wesley Snipes from the titular role was greatly criticized, considering how he had become the face of the character after his memorable performance in the trilogy. Krista Starr was a soldier who returned from military service in Iraq only to discover that her brother Zach had died under mysterious circumstances. Refusing to accept the explanation, she started diving into details and found that Zach used to be a familiar. He used to serve a vampire in the hopes of being rewarded with eternal life. Her search ultimately led her to Marcus Van Sciver, the vampire who had killed Zach, and Blade, a vampire hunter. Marcus is a very powerful vampire and a high-ranking member of the House of Chthon. He becomes smitten with Krista and turns her into a vampire by injecting his blood into her. Then, she's approached by Blade, who gives her the antidote serum that he himself uses to handle his vampiric instincts, and asks her to join forces with him to get revenge on Marcus for the death of her brother. Blade also reveals that Zach was actually working with him to bring down the House of Chthon, and Krista reluctantly agrees to pair with him. The show focuses a lot on Krista trying to maintain her double agent cover in the House of Chthon and trying to control her inherently predatory instincts. Marcus was also working on the Aurora project that could lead to vampires becoming immune to their traditional weaknesses, including sunlight, silver, and garlic. Later, it's revealed that Marcus had sabotaged the project to create a virus that's deadly to the pureblood vampires, the nobility and ruling vampire class. However, it would have no effect on the turnblood vampires, those who were once human and later turn. With Blade's assistance, he ultimately unleashes hell upon the House of Chthon. The premiere of Blade the series had 2.5 million viewers and became the most watched original series premiere in Spike TV history. However, it wasn't able to keep up the numbers with more episodes. The series had an approval rating of 50% on Rotten Tomatoes based on reviews from 18 different critics. The general consensus was that the series focused too much on gore and techno music than actual storytelling and cinematic elements, which made the action bland instead of riveting. On Metacritic, the reviews indicated mixed or average response. However, many critics did praise the action sequences for being adrenaline-inducing. While it fumbled in terms of character building and storytelling, it did make up for some of it with the fight sequences and unconventional take on traditional vampire shows. However, despite some interesting twists towards the end, the show wasn't memorable. This was highly attributed to Wesley Snipes not being in the titular role. When Sticky Fingers was announced as the person who would portray Blade, he commented that he wasn't trying to get one over Snipes because his role in the movies was legendary. He simply wanted to give the show a new direction with his portrayal and incorporate a few of the things that Snipes did. Technically, he didn't do a horrible job either, but people were still too used to watching Snipes in the role that his acting appeared flat to most of the viewers of the movies. When it was announced that the show was going to be canceled, the main reason attributed was that the network couldn't keep up with the expenses required for a second season. Mutant X, 2001 to 2004. This one was a fan favorite that ultimately went off air due to conflicts between networks. Created under a Marvel Comics license, this was in no way connected to the X-Men universe or the Mutant X comic book. The show revolved around a group of new mutants who developed powers thanks to genetic engineering. They sought out more mutants like them to protect. They were used as unsuspecting test subjects for covert government experiments. At the center of the show was Genome X, formerly known as the Breedlove Foundation, a biotech company that focused on genetic research. Their employees were top scientists from around the world, and they created new mutants. While the company was completely aware of the results of their experimentation, they kept their subjects in the dark. Mutant X was formed by Adam Kane, a former biogeneticist at Genome X. Despite not being a new mutant himself, he pretty much serves as the brain of the team, providing tactical and moral support. He considered it his responsibility to save the new mutants who were created due to his experiments, and he was a skilled martial artist. Shalimar Fox was another member of Mutant X who possessed both human and feline DNA, making her strong, swift, and cunning. Jesse Kilmartin possessed the ability to manipulate his body's molecular structure, allowing him to pass through walls or become as solid as stone. Due to his secondary mutation, his ability extended to any object he touched, which would become as solid as him. Brennan Mulray was an electrical elemental who could control and generate an extraordinary amount of electricity. His secondary mutation allowed him to use his electricity to launch jets from his palms and launch himself into the air. Emma DeLauro was a tele-empathetic new mutant, while Lexa Pierce was a chromatic molecular mutant who could bend light to make herself and anything she touched invisible. When the new mutants began appearing on the news, Mason Eckhart, the former head of security at Genome X, set up the Genetic Security Agency. This was done to locate and capture new mutants and put them in a state of stasis so they could be further experimented on. All new mutants were classified into 4 groups. There were the ferals, who were formed by combining human and animal DNA. The animal DNA came from animals ranging from cats to fish. Molecules were new mutants who could alter the molecular structure of their bodies in different ways in different situations. They were further subclassified into different groups based on their specific abilities. Elementals were new mutants capable of channeling and controlling different kinds of energy through their bodies. This included thermals, electricals, sonics, botanicals, chemicals, and even biologicals. Finally, psionic new mutants had heightened mental senses, which included telepaths, teleempaths, telecybers, and so on. While the show was actually quite good, issues between Fox and Marvel started causing problems. Fox sued the latter, advertising Mutant X as too close to X-Men and intending the show to replace X-Men altogether. There was a countersuit, which ultimately led to production being allowed. Ultimately, Fireworks Entertainment, the production company behind the show, was dismantled, which spelled the end for Mutant X. Human Target, 2010 to 2011. This show was loosely based on the Human Target comic book character created by Carmen Infantino and Len Wein for DC Comics. Jonathan E. Steinberg developed it, and it aired on Fox in the United States. The show revolved around Christopher Chance, played by Mark Valley, a private contractor based in San Francisco and also a bodyguard and security expert hired to protect clients. Instead of taking on the client's identity himself, as is done in the comics, he protects them by completely integrating himself into their lives and becoming a human target. He's always accompanied by his business partner, Winston, played by Chi McBride, who was a former policeman at the San Francisco PD, and hitman Guerrero, played by Jackie Earle Haley. Isla Pucci, played by Indira Varma, a former client, becomes Chance's benefactor, and an experienced thief named Ames, played by Janet Montgomery, joins the team as well. Chance is later revealed to have taken his name from the previous Christopher Chance, and his real name is never mentioned. As an assassin, he was formerly employed by the Old Man and had become one of the best assassins in the world under his care. However, he had broken away from that life and taken on a different identity. Human Target had overwhelmingly positive reviews from fans and critics alike. Despite being preposterous at times, the comedic effect and action sequences in the show made it worthwhile. The titular character, due to his role as a human target, can perform exceptional stunts and get by without a single scratch, which often appeared to be too much to follow through. However, almost everyone praised the action scenes and cinematography, with special praise to the stunt team. Many people were even of the opinion that the action was what saved this series from becoming a flop, because otherwise, the storyline was kinda weak. The second season of the show had more favorable reviews than the first, and viewership remained strong throughout both seasons, and there was really no good reason for Human Target to be cancelled, but Fox did it without assigning any specific reason for their decision. Kinda typical. Despite the hold it had on people back then, the show slowly started becoming more and more obscure over the years. Just in time to make it on our list, Marvelous Verdict! These are just some of the superhero shows from the 2000s which were quite popular, but hardly anyone remembers. Granted, some of them weren't exceptional in any sense of the term, so it made sense for them to get forgotten and canceled. However, a few of them were genuinely promising and could have turned into successful franchises if they had continued. As we've seen, many times, even when there's nothing seemingly wrong with the show or ratings, networks simply drop them due to internal reasons that are never fully specified. While fans believe that some of the more exceptional shows, such as Witchblade, Mutant X, and Human Target, ought to be taken up again by networks, it's not likely to happen considering how oversaturated the superhero TV genre is today. Moreover, audiences today are way tougher than critics, and nothing drives them more nuts than a popular source material being turned into a mediocre show. In fact, they really hate that. How many of these shows do you remember watching? What was your favorite show from the 2000s that got canceled? Let us know in the comments down below. We're always looking for ideas for new videos. As always, if you enjoyed our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.